The air above the water was different, sharp, filled with 1,000 new scents I had never known before. I had no voice to scream. I couldn't call out. The witch had taken it in exchange for these legs that made every step feel like fire. The pain was searing, as if a knife was splitting me from tail to toe. I saw him approach, a large, grizzled man with eyes hard as stones. His skin was worn from the salt and wind of the sea, and his lips twisted into a cruel smile when he saw me.
Well, what do we have here?
I wanted to speak, to explain that I needed his help. I only had 3 days to find the prince, to kiss him, and seal my fate as a human forever. But I couldn't make a sound. I reached out, pleading with my eyes. He laughed, a low, wicked sound that sent shivers down my spine.
Can't speak, huh? That's fine. I don't need words from a catch like you.
I tried to scramble away, but my legs, my new cursed legs, were weak and unsteady. Before I could escape, his hands were on me. They were rough, tearing at my skin. I wasn't a princess here. I wasn't even a person. I was just another piece of meat in his catch. When he was done, he dragged me ashore, then the town, straight to a market where people bought and sold lives. He handed me over to the highest bidder. I was trapped in this world, with legs that hurt and a voice that was lost. I once dreamed that the human world was beautiful and admirable, but it seems I was mistaken. They took me, bound my wrists, pushed me into dark corners, forced me to carry heavy stones, to work until my body was covered in bruises and welts. Even my legs burned from the brand they seared into my skin, punishing me. They were once a symbol of my dream, had become a curse. They didn't see me for what I was, a lost soul searching for love. They only saw a thing to exploit. Days passed, or maybe it was only hours. Time had become a blur of pain and exhaustion. And then I saw him, my prince. He was there, walking through the market, his golden hair catching the light. I had found him. My salvation was right in front of me. If I could just get to him, if I could kiss him, this nightmare would be over. I stumbled forward, my legs barely holding me. But before I could reach him, hands grabbed me, yanking me back. I was thrown to the ground, beaten for daring to approach royalty. I cried silently, tears mixing with the dirt on my face. They chained me, binding my feet together, and I couldn't even run. My legs, once my dream, had become my prison. Later, when they released me, I found myself staring out at the ocean. The waves called to me, whispering of home, of the freedom I had once known. I wiped away a tear. I had thought being human would make me happy. But it was not as it seemed. I didn't have much time left. The 3rd day was nearly over. Soon I would return to the sea, tail and voice restored. And then he was there. The prince! He approached me, touched my shoulder. His eyes filled with kindness, confusion.
Are you all right?
This was it. The moment I had waited for. The kiss that would make me human forever. I leaned forward, desperate to kiss him, to end this curse. But before our lips could touch, rough hands grabbed me once more. The guards pulled me away, slamming me to the ground.
How dare a slave touch the prince?
They shouted. The blows came fast and hard, my body racked with pain. And then it happened. Before their eyes, I felt the transformation begin. The legs that had caused me so much torment melted away. The delicate scales returned, shimmering in the dull light of the setting sun. They gasped in horror. I was no longer a woman, no longer a slave. I was a creature from the depths, a monster in their eyes.
A human with a fishtails!
Someone cried.
A beast!
Kill it, and the prize is yours.
I couldn't believe I was hearing those words from the person I had been waiting for all this time. The crowd turned on me, their faces twisted with fear and hatred. They descended like wolves, tearing at me, fighting each other to claim a piece of the prize. "Please," I cried, my voice hoarse. I begged, but they didn't hear me, or they ignored me. My body once again at the mercy of those who saw me as nothing more than an object to be used, a curiosity to be destroyed. They beat me, their hatred pouring out with every blow. I felt bones snap, skin tear, but I didn't fight back. I had no strength left. From afar, I saw the prince standing there. He did nothing. And then he smiled as they tore me to piece. And then the darkness swallowed me whole.
The slipper is still in my hand, cold and delicate, catching the light in glimmers. I look into its glassy surface and barely recognize the creature reflected there. A girl with ragged clothes, matted hair, and twisted features. Only last night, I was beautiful with a little help of dark magic. I wore that slipper, I danced in those arms. And now, I am back here, beneath the soot-streaked bricks, crouching in the dark, hiding from my stepmother and her wretched daughters. Then, I hear a murmur from the streets beyond. The prince. He's announced he will marry the girl who fits this slipper. It's a strange hope in my heart, a strange, desperate longing to be the one he sees again, to have that beauty back and hold it forever. But my stepmother, she'd never let me leave this house. Through the dust, I hear her voice shriek from above. They're already gathering their best gowns, my two stepsisters bickering over which jewels to wear, as if any of it would matter. None of them has ever had the slipper on their foot. None of them knows the lightness, the power it brings. But I do. I can hardly stand as I slip through the door and find Clara, the eldest sister, fitting herself into a pile of silk. "You're trying the slipper," I whisper, not letting her see the disdain curling my lips. "You know you'll need to trim those hideous toes." Clara scoffs, but she eyes her foot nervously. She hates me, loathes me, but she hates her oversized feet even more.
Fine,
She hisses.
but do it for me. Only a little.
She thrusts her foot toward me, and with trembling hands I raise the axe. With each snip her face contorts, but she's greedy as our mother. I slip my fingers under her heel and tighten my grip, watching as her blood trickles, her anger and pain bubbling through a mask of helpless desperation. The first scream dies in her throat when I slit it. It's messy, sticky, and all too thrilling. I feel her warmth sink into my fingers. Her blood seeps over my hands, and, without thinking, I bring it to my mouth. And that taste raw, it feels like the clock winding backward, like youth and beauty are seeping through me again. I lick my hands. I drink from her lifeless palm, and my cheeks flush, the wrinkles smooth. My reflection grows fairer, just as I had been at the ball. Now she's nothing but silence, crumpled on the floor, and yes, I am beautiful once more. But that's not enough. Her younger sister, Helena, comes in next, her brow furrowed as she sees Clara slumped over.
What did you...
She starts, but her suspicion quickly turns to arrogance.
Just leave her there. Clean up later. Help me with my shoes.
I smile, my teeth catching the dim candlelight, and say, I think you should cut off the heel.
Whatever, just make it quick.
Helena never thinks twice. She snaps her fingers, turns her nose up, and believes all will obey. I kneel by her side, sliding her foot toward me, my mind already buzzing with the weight of what I'm about to do. I hold the knife close to her skin, pressing just so, watching her face twist in that perfect moment of realization just before I slice. She yelps, but she's too stunned to fight back. I press down harder and harder until her screams grow muffled, then silent. Her blood is as rich as her sister's, and I drink it down, feeling its heat merge with mine. Each swallow makes my skin smoother, my face softer, my reflection sharper, more enchanting. The darkness within me rises, blossoming like some wicked flower, filling my chest with the thrill of revenge, of beauty, of finally being more than the shadow beneath the stairs. When I stand, I am radiant. I am reborn. Then my dearest stepmother came home. As usual, she barked out orders for me to set the dinner table. I complied, carrying out a lavish platter of meat. I looked radiant, but she didn't spare me a glance. She didn't even notice my change. Her eyes were always reserved for her own daughters, never me. She started eating, and between bites she asked,
"Where are the girls? Why aren't they joining us for dinner?"
I smiled. Oh, I helped them fit into the glass slipper. I had to trim their toes and shave off their heels. Her chewing slowed, her face pale. Then she gagged. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. She spat out her food and clutched her stomach, retching violently. She had been feasting on her daughter's remains. I seized the opportunity. Moving swiftly, I grabbed her from behind and wrapped my hands around her throat. She struggled, clawing at my arms, but I squeezed tighter until her body went limp and collapsed to the floor. But as I stared at my reflection in the silver tray, I saw the beauty fading, the glow, the perfection slipping away. Desperate, I leaned down and drank from her lifeless body. I couldn't stop. The blood coursed through me, intoxicating and powerful, but I had drunk too much. My skin sagged, my frame distorted. My once delicate features twisted into something grotesque. I had consumed more than blood. I had consumed my own humanity. Then I hear a knock at the door. The prince. His voice calls out, strong and clear, asking for the woman who fits the slipper. I pull myself upright, grasping the slipper, limping and shuddering as I make my way toward him, past the bodies of those who once mocked me. I throw open the door, the slipper clutched in my hand, a desperate smile on my cracked, bloodied lips. The prince's eyes go wide. He stumbles back, his mouth agape as he takes in the horror before him. "Wait!" I scream, my voice more like a howl now. I shove the slipper toward him, but the soldiers have already drawn their swords. They don't see me. They see a monster. And as they lunge, blades flashing, my final scream echoes through the halls, a shriek of beauty corrupted, of vengeance that demanded too much.
I had been searching for her for what felt like a lifetime. Snow White, the princess of the neighboring kingdom. Stories of her beauty spread like wildfire through the lands. But it wasn't until a diplomatic visit to her castle that I saw her for the first time. It was fleeting, just a moment in passing. But in that instant, my heart belonged to her. She was unlike anyone I had ever seen, a vision of purity and grace. I returned to her kingdom soon after, but the Snow White I had seen was no longer at the castle. I heard whispers from the servants, rumors of an evil queen and a terrible curse. They said Snow White had fallen under the spell of the queen's dark magic and had disappeared, her fate uncertain. Dead or alive, no one knew for sure. I had to find her. The thought of her suffering, or worse, gone forever, haunted my every waking moment. It was all I could think about. So I ventured into the deep forest, where I heard she was lying in a strange, enchanted sleep, guarded by the 7 dwarfs who once sheltered her. When I arrived at the clearing, my heart raced. There she was, inside a glass coffin, her body untouched by time or decay. Snow White lay as if merely sleeping, her beauty preserved, unblemished by death. Her skin was still as pale as snow, her lips red like blood, and her hair black as ebony. She was perfect. My heart swelled with purpose. The dwarfs told me that only the kiss of true love could break the curse. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down on me. I knelt beside her and lowered my lips to hers, pressing them against the cold softness of her mouth. But the kiss felt wrong. Her lips were as cold as ice, like kissing the surface of a frozen lake. Still, I refused to believe anything could be wrong. This was a fairy tale. I was her prince. My kiss would wake her, and we would live happily ever after. The dwarfs watched in silence, and I waited. But nothing happened. No flutter of eyelashes, no breath of life. She remained still. I couldn't accept it. I was meant to save her. So I took her from the glass coffin, carried her fragile body back to my kingdom, and declared her my bride. No one dared object, though many whispered behind closed doors that something was deeply wrong. They didn't understand. They couldn't feel what I felt. I loved her. She was my Snow White, and nothing would change that. At the palace, I dressed her in the finest gowns, sat her by my side at the grand dining table, and arranged her hair each morning. Her lips, which I painted a deep red, stood out against the paleness of her skin. I made sure she looked as beautiful as ever. But she never moved. She never spoke. Her glassy eyes stared at me, unblinking, unseeing. At night, I would hold her cold body close, whispering to her about the life we would build once the curse finally broke. But as the days passed, I began to feel something strange. A weakness in my body, a sickness creeping under my skin. At first, it was just fatigue, but soon sores began to appear, red, festering wounds. And I wasn't the only one. The servants grew sick too, their skin cracking and bleeding. The palace became a house of rot. Whispers spread through the kingdom. People began to say that Snow White was cursed, that her lifeless body was spreading a plague. They wanted her gone. They feared her, called her a harbinger of disease, and demanded that she be destroyed. But I couldn't let them take her from me. She was my princess, my bride, and I loved her more than anything. Yet, as my body weakened and the sores multiplied, I could no longer stand against the growing mob. One night, they stormed the palace, dragging Snow White's lifeless body from her bed. I screamed at them to stop, but my voice was weak, barely more than a rasp. They took her deep into the forest and built a pyre. I couldn't let my Snow White suffer like that. I pushed myself from the bed, ignoring the pain tearing through my limbs, and ran after them, the world spinning around me. By the time I reached the clearing, flames were already licking at the edges of her gown. The heat was unbearable, but I couldn't stop myself. I rushed into the fire, ignoring the screams of the villagers. Snow White lay in the center of the inferno, her face still calm and beautiful despite the flames consuming her. I reached for her, pulling her into my arms, but as I held her, her body began to disintegrate. Her perfect skin crumbled into ash beneath my fingers, her beautiful face turning to dust. The harder I clutched her, the more she fell apart, until all that was left of my Snow White was a pile of grey, lifeless ash. In the end, all I could do was hold on to the ashes of my beloved, even as the flames consumed me.
It all started with a story. I was sitting in the back of the classroom, my legs stretched out under the desk, smirking as the new teacher, Ms. Evelyn, told us about Pinocchio. She had a haunting way of speaking, her voice soft but piercing, as if it could slice through your lies and expose every hidden truth.
Lies,
She said,
don't just twist the world around you. They twist you. They reshape you into something you don't recognize.
I rolled my eyes. Cool story, miss, but we're not 5 anymore. The class chuckled, and I basked in the attention. I was Beano, the untouchable. My dad's money kept me safe no matter what I did. That afternoon, Jim became my target again. Skinny, quiet, and always an easy pick. Hey, Jimmy boy, I called, snatching the milk carton from his hands. Before he could react, I dumped it over his head.
Stop, please!
Jim's voice cracked as he wiped milk from his face. But mercy wasn't my style. As he tried to escape, I loaded my slingshot with a small stone. But Jim turned at the last second. For a second, I just stood there, the slingshot slack in my hand. Then the fear kicked in. My heart pounded, but I did what I always did. I walked away. Let someone else find him. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of Jim falling replayed in my mind. When I finally drifted off, I woke up to a strange stiffness in my legs. I threw back the covers and gasped. My left leg was straight, rigid, and unnaturally smooth. Running my hand over it, I realized with growing horror, it felt like polished wood. This isn't real, I muttered. Pulling on a pair of jeans, I forced myself to act normal. All the attention that morning was on Jim. Whispers circulated about how he'd been found unconscious, hospitalized with no sign of waking up. My stomach twisted. Surely that couldn't be my fault. Could it? Then the police showed up. They questioned everyone going down the line of students. My stomach churned as they got closer.
Beano,
One officer said, his pen poised.
where were you after school yesterday?
I swallowed hard. The truth clawed at my throat, but I couldn't admit it. Not when my dad's reputation, my safety, everything was on the line. I went straight home, I lied. Pain shot up to my shoulder as I looked down. My fingers were locking into place, the skin taking on the same unnatural wooden texture as my leg. I clutched my arm, hiding it behind my back. That's all I know. The officer nodded and moved on, but the damage was done. I darted behind the school building, my breath ragged. I checked my hand. It was wooden, my fingers stiff, immobile. A voice behind me made me jump.
Beano, are you all right?
I turned to see Ms. Evelyn. Her gaze was sharp, too knowing. She asked if I knew anything about Jim's injury. I shook my head, denying it again. But with every word, I felt my body stiffen further, my chest constricting like it was encased in a wooden cage. Ms. Evelyn's eyes bore into me, and she said softly,
Beano, lying won't save you. I can't help if you don't tell the truth.
At home, my dad was waiting, his usual stern expression fixed on me.
Sit down.
He ordered. I obeyed, my legs creaking like ancient floorboards.
What happened at school today?
I hesitated. The room seemed to close in around me. Nothing, Dad. Just a normal day. The wooden transformation surged. My hands froze mid-air. My face stiffened as my nose began to stretch outward. Enough! I blurted, tears spilling. It's my fault. Jim is hurt because of me. I didn't mean to. But my confession did little to soften my father's gaze.
Does anyone else know?
He asked coldly. Miss Evelyn, I admitted. She suspects everything. For a moment, my father said nothing. The silence was unbearable. I dreaded these moments, the calm before the storm. Maybe I had gone too far this time. Maybe I'd finally done something even he couldn't protect me from. I'm sorry, Dad. Tomorrow I'll go to the police. I'll tell them everything. I dropped to my knees, pleading for his forgiveness. I regret what I did, and all the lies. He rose slowly, his movements unnervingly stiff. Under the flickering light, his shadow warped and stretched, revealing something monstrous. My heart froze. His true form emerged, a towering wooden puppet, his face rigid and eerily lifeless.
We don't lie, Bino. We create the truth.
As he spoke, his nose began to extend, the wooden grain cracking as it grew longer. Without a word, he opened a drawer, pulling out a rusty saw. In one swift, he sliced through the wooden length of his nose. Dad? What are you doing?
She'll be handled. You'll learn, just as I did.
As he left, his wooden joints creaking, I sat there, paralyzed. The next day, Miss Evelyn didn't show up. Rumours spread, but no one had answers. I knew, though. Dad had silenced her. More unsettling was the slow realisation that other staff members, teachers, the principal, moved with that same stilted stiffness. They were like me, or worse, like my father. At break time, my friends asked,
Do you know what happened to Miss Evelyn?
I hesitated. My wooden fingers tapped against the table. No idea. I would never escape. A puppet, bound by strings I couldn't see, forever performing the lies I told.
It began like any other morning. I laced up my running shoes and took my usual route through the forest. The crisp air, the sound of leaves crunching beneath my feet. This was my sanctuary. Until today, I nearly stepped on it. A toad sitting eerily still in the middle of the path. I stopped just in time, crouching to get a closer look. Its back was studded with strange golden orbs. At first, I thought they were boils, swollen and ready to burst. Injury, perhaps? But no, the orbs seemed too deliberate, too alive. As I leaned in, the orbs began to sink, like marbles disappearing into the toad's flesh. The holes, deep, dark, and unnervingly round, began to expand. And then, from those grotesque pits, something emerged. I watched in horror as the sacks began to split, revealing grotesque limbs that unfurled with unnatural speed. Tadpoles? No, something worse, birthed directly from the toad's flesh. One of the creatures, slimy and malformed, launched itself onto my arm. I screamed, swatting at the tiny monster, but more of them sprang forth, latching onto my face, my neck. Their tiny, clawed limbs clung desperately to my skin. I could feel the cold, wet slime spreading as I tried to shake them off, but their grip was unyielding. My breaths came in panicked gasps as I clawed at my own skin. Finally, I managed to dislodge them, flinging their writhing bodies into the underbrush. Gasping and trembling, I stumbled home, my arms slick with their mucus. Red welts began to bloom across my skin. In the bathroom, I scrubbed myself raw. The hot water only intensified the burning sensation. I poured soap over every inch of my body, determined to erase the feeling of those things crawling on me. But no matter how much I scrubbed, the sensation lingered. My mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene. Those holes, those sacks, the vile creatures emerging from the depths. When I glanced at the bathroom sink, its drain, a simple circular opening, seemed to pulse. The tiles on the floor with their neat round patterns became a maze of voids. Every pore on my body seemed magnified. Even the tiny pores on my own skin seemed to gape at me, like miniature mouths ready to spew more horrors. I couldn't escape the imagery. Exhausted and desperate, I crawled into bed. I needed sleep, a reprieve from the madness clawing at my sanity. I forced myself to close my eyes and let the world fade away. But when I opened them again, it was there. I bolted upright, heart pounding, but the toad remained, unfazed by my panic. The toad stared at me with its unblinking eyes. Its presence was oppressive, its weight suffocating. My hands. It was my hands that made me freeze. They were slick, their skin darker, shinier. The dim light in my room distorted everything, but even in the shadows, I could see the unnatural sheen. "What did you do to me?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The toad spoke. Its voice was guttural, low, reverberating in my skull.
"I kissed you. You are my mate now. You have to give birth for me."
I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping in my haste. The mirror on the wall caught my eye, and I turned toward it. What I saw brought bile to my throat. My reflection was no longer human. My skin, now a sickly green-brown, was covered in a slick, mucus-like film. My hands were grotesquely webbed, my eyes bulging slightly from my skull. But worst of all was my back. Through the reflection, I saw golden orbs, the same orbs that adorned the toad, sprouting from my flesh. They pulsed, they quivered. Then, with a sickening pop, the orbs burst open, revealing the same deep holes. My body spasmed as tiny creatures, part human, part toad, began to emerge. Their grotesque forms wriggled free, flopping onto the floor. They called me mother. Dozens of them, no, hundreds, crawled out of me, each more hideous than the last. Their voices, a cacophony of screeches and croaks, filled the room. They climbed onto the bed, the walls, and eventually onto me. Their touch burned, their tiny claws sinking into my flesh. I couldn't scream. My throat was raw, my body overwhelmed. They swarmed me, their weight pressing me down. And as they chanted their grotesque refrain, I felt myself sinking, consumed by their slimy, writhing bodies. Darkness swallowed me. I woke to the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. My skin was raw, covered in red, itchy welts. A doctor stood over me, clipboard in hand.
"You've had an allergic reaction,"
he explained, his tone clinical.
"Probably from contact with a toad. You're lucky it wasn't worse."
Relief flooded through me. It was just a reaction, a nightmare fueled by fever and paranoia. But as I sat up, something caught my eye. Tiny, round holes had begun to form on my arm, and for a moment, I swore I heard a faint croak.
It was another boring Christmas Eve. My roommate was out on a date with his girlfriend, leaving me home alone. I randomly picked a Christmas movie to watch, only to realize I had chosen a horror movie. I quickly turned off the TV, and the deafening scream from the movie finally stopped. No longer in the mood for TV, I decided to call it a night and head to bed early. But after finishing my nightly routine, the bathroom door got stuck. At first, I felt more confused than worried. It's just the two of us guys living here, so I never bother locking the bathroom door. But tonight, for some reason, the door was jammed shut, combined with the creepy vibe of the horror movie I'd just watched. The whole situation felt off. I've never found having a sturdy door so troublesome. I kicked it with all my might, but it didn't budge. Out of options, I pressed my ear against the wall to listen for any noise from the neighbors, but they were having a party, and my sounds were drowned out by the music. The room is 10 by 10 by 8 feet. Based on the usual oxygen levels, I could stay conscious for another 1 to 3 hours, depending on my physical condition and energy consumption. I calmed down and tried to break the lock, but it wasn't as easy as in the movies. Frustrated, I used force on the door handle, but it didn't work either. Suddenly, I heard shouting from my living room. I was about to call for help, but then I realized it wasn't my friend's voice. At least 2 people were fighting. My house had been broken into. The fight abruptly stopped. I held my breath as footsteps approached. Had they discovered me and planned to eliminate me? The intruder stopped at the bathroom door and started talking to me.
You're the owner of this house, right? Don't worry, I'm just a part-time worker dressed as Santa Claus to deliver gifts to kids. I found an intruder in your house, but don't worry, I've taken care of him.
I pretended to listen to his excuses, having no other choice as I was about to suffocate in this small room. He used a saw to break the door. He was definitely trying to intimidate me. The door opened. I felt a chill down my spine, my heart racing. I had to stay alert and find a chance to fight back. The intruder, dressed as Santa Claus, seemed to have indeed fought with someone, but I couldn't trust him easily. I threw a bar of soap at him. As I hoped, the intruder slipped on the soap, and I quickly escaped his reach. I quickly ran to the living room to call the police, but the sight stopped me in my tracks. There was a large pool of blood on the floor, indicating someone was seriously injured. It couldn't be the thief I had just taken down. He must have an accomplice, so I couldn't act recklessly until I found the injured one. I grabbed a firework tube, ready to fight these thieves.
You bastard trying to escape? What? Where did he go?
The thief's words confused me. It seemed they weren't on the same side. No matter, I had to deal with the one in front of me first. The sound of fireworks and the thief's screams filled me with satisfaction. I had defeated my first enemy of the night. Just then, the appearance of an uninvited guest made me feel scared. In front of me stood a Santa Claus, but what terrified me was that he looked and appeared exactly like the Santa Claus from the horror movie I had just watched. The thief seemed extremely scared of this Santa Claus, only managing to scream in fear before running away. But what I saw next horrified me even more. That Santa Claus had just teleported right in front of me. The thief, now targeted by Santa Claus, looked utterly terrified as if facing a demon.
You're not human. I clearly killed you earlier.
I was horrified to see 2 Santa Clauses in front of me, and it was clear the second one wasn't human. I had to do something to stop him before he dealt with the thief and turned on me. Both were dressed identically and kept switching positions. I held a dart in my hand but didn't know where to aim. I decided to throw it with all my might. Tonight, Neither of them would leave my house safely. The dart flew, and I took one down. The one I hit was the thief. The remaining Santa Claus looked at me with a mocking smile, which filled me with fear. Even though it was self-defense, I had to admit I had just killed someone. Before I could recover, another horrifying scene unfolded before my eyes. The Santa Claus in front of me seemed like a grim reaper, sucking the thief's soul. He turned the thief into an ornament in his gift bag. Startled with fear, I faced a nameless, mysterious force. Regretting turning off the horror movie too soon, I wondered if watching further might have revealed how to confront this demonic Santa Claus.
Since you killed someone, you are a naughty child, and naughty children must be taken away.
My whole body froze, and then the evil Santa lunged at me, enveloping me in endless darkness. They say the world was once ruled by fear, not joy. Before Christmas became a time of celebration, it was a season of terror. Winter nights were longer, colder, and filled with the dread of monstrous creatures. Bipedal reindeer, with fur as black as the void, twisted antlers like thorns of hell, and eyes glowing red as embers. These were no ordinary reindeer. They didn't pull sleighs, they rode them, and their sleds weren't loaded with gifts of cheer, but with the tormented souls of the damned, cursed to drag the reindeer through the skies, screaming into the frigid night. Every year, at the end of winter, the air would fill with the haunting sound of bells, signaling the arrival of their terrible gifts. Not toys or candy, but death, fear, and despair. The village was gripped by unspeakable dread. Cursed presents appeared everywhere. There was the wooden mask, carved with an eerie precision, which once worn fused to its victim's face, trapping them forever behind its hollow stare. Another was the ominous countdown clock, its hands ticking backward. It would drain the very life from whoever held it, leaving only an empty shell behind. Each year, these cursed artifacts would appear on doorsteps, bringing ruin to all who touched them. No one escaped their fate. That fateful night, my mother and I huddled together in our small wooden cabin, every light extinguished. The darkness felt like a blanket of safety, but we knew better. The reindeer didn't need light to find us. They could smell fear. And in our home, fear was thick. The bells came first, their chime low and ominous, cutting through the howling wind. Then, the front door burst open, laughter followed, a high-pitched, maniacal sound that made my skin crawl. A small, tattered box waited on the doorstep, as if it had always been there. Its faded tag bore the words, "The sinner Evelyn," my mother's name. I begged her not to touch it, but her hands shook as she reached for it, as if she were hypnotized. Inside was a threadbare doll. Its eyes, dull at first, flared a hellish red as its stitched mouth curled into a sinister grin. My mother's body seized violently. She fell, writhing on the floor, frothy foam bubbling from her lips as she mumbled in an unearthly tongue. Her only sin was raising me alone. Yet for that, she was condemned to a fate worse than death. Before I could scream, they came. The monstrous reindeer seized her, dragging her to their sleigh, She became another cursed soul bound to their infernal sleigh, leaving me alone with the cold and the fear. Desperate and enraged, I grabbed the nearest thing, pine cones scattered near the hearth, and hurled them at the creatures. To my shock, the reindeer shrieked, their movements becoming erratic. They scratched at their fur as if trying to rid themselves of some unseen torment. One by one, they stumbled and retreated into the night, their howls of pain echoing through the frozen air. It wasn't until later that I realized what had happened. Pine. These monsters were allergic to it. The scent, the texture, it weakened them. And so, I began to prepare. For an entire year, I worked tirelessly. My family had always been woodworkers, and I knew the forest well. I harvested pine, crafting weapons and traps. I forged a plan, waiting for the next winter, the next chance to avenge my mother and end the reign of these beasts. When the time came, I stood at the edge of the pine forest, wooden sword in hand and a sack full of pine cones slung over my shoulder. I called out to them, taunting them, daring them to face me. They came, as I knew they would. The bells tolled, the sky darkened, and the ground shook beneath their heavy steps. The lead reindeer, its antlers larger and more twisted than the rest, bared its jagged teeth and charged. I ran, leading them deep into the forest where the air was thick with the scent of pine. I ducked behind a large tree, holding my breath as the creatures slowed, their heads swinging wildly, unable to find me. From the shadows, I struck. With a single thrust of my wooden sword, I jabbed it straight into the mouth of the lead reindeer. Its body collapsed, its death cry piercing the night. The others hesitated, disoriented and vulnerable. I hurled pine cones at them, watching as they thrashed and stumbled, their strength waning. One by one, they fell. When the dawn broke, I emerged from the forest victorious. I had captured the surviving reindeer, binding them with ropes infused with pine resin. They would no longer bring death and despair to my village. Instead, I repurposed their sleigh. I filled it with gifts, dolls, sweets, and books I had crafted over the year, and rode through the village, delivering them to the homes of those who had lived righteously. I urged the people to embrace kindness and generosity, for these virtues were invisible to the reindeer. And so, Christmas was born, not as a time of fear, but of joy and giving. Each year I return with my sleigh, pulled by the subdued reindeer, their savage instincts kept in check by the scent of pine that lingers on my sleigh's reins. But I remind everyone, the reindeer are still out there, lurking, waiting for the chance to escape. And so we light our homes with warmth and kindness, and we hang pine wreaths on our doors to keep the darkness at bay. This is the tale of how I, once a terrified boy named Nick, became a legend.